The arc whip snapped, a blinding line of violet ozone that wrapped around Kalen's ribs with the smell of scorched fabric and burning meat. The snow around them hissed into steam. Before Silas could reel the weapon back, Alara was already inside his guard, a scavenged vibroblade pressed tight against the corporate sweeper's carotid artery. What would you risk for a truth that isn't even yours? The frost on his ship's viewport had been thick enough to scrape off with a wrench when Kalen first found her, 72 hours before the ozone burned his lungs. Beneath the crushed ferroconcrete of Sector 4's transit line, nothing should have been alive. Kalen's thermal scanner had pinged a ghost of faint, flickering heat signature buried under 3 feet of Cryos 9's relentless powder. He dug her out, an unequipped Kalian female, skin the color of bruised ice, heartbeat dropping to a sluggish thud every 15 seconds. She was completely unresponsive, her core temperature crashing so fast he could practically see the life evaporating from her frozen lips. Dead weight. He dragged her back to the Vagrant, his wrecked hauler shivering in the crosswinds. The environmental seals barely held. He dumped his last 300 illicit credits to a black market drone just to procure a thermal plasma weave, wrapping her motionless frame in the glowing mesh. A low hum, the weave syncing with her faltering pulse, which meant he had just spent his only ticket off this rock on a total stranger. Kalen sat back, watching the readout stabilize as the Kalian's core temperature crept upward. The body was a machine designed only to endure shutting down non-essential functions to preserve the brain at all costs. Survival was just a metabolic hostage situation. But living? Living required a conscious choice to push forward. He watched her chest rise and fall, waiting to see if she would make one. It took a full day for the shivering to stop. When she finally opened her eyes, they were starkly clear, taking in the corrosion and exposed wiring of his cabin. She didn't panic. She didn't speak. She just dragged herself off the cot and moved to the frozen viewport. With a trembling finger, she pressed against the glass. The name hung in the frost. Kalen handed her a ration pack. She ignored the food, instead reaching into the seamless synth skin of her forearm. A concealed biomod port slid open. She pulled out a memory cipher, no bigger than a thumbnail, dripping with synthetic coolant. "It's the blackout," Alara rasped, her voice torn like old paper. The core indeed, the outer rim. It wasn't a plague. Kalen stared at the tiny drive. He knew what corporate sweepers did to people caught with restricted data. They didn't just kill you. They erased the fact that you ever existed. The truth is a dangerous thing to hold on a frozen world. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss where this broadcast goes. The Vagrant didn't have the comms array to push a signal through the atmospheric interference. If this data was going to matter, they needed a booster. Kalen ripped the primary power cell from the console, plunging the ship into total darkness, and rerouted the dying charge to a portable beacon array. They were burning their only shelter. The hike to the abandoned Echo Station was brutal. Cryos 9's winds screamed across the plains, sharp enough to cut through the plasma weave, whipping ice crystals against their visors in a relentless whiteout that made every step feel like walking into a solid wall. Kalen led the way, his boots breaking the crust of the snow, creating a path for Alara. He kept his eyes fixed forward, listening to the strained rhythm of her breathing. They reached the exterior of the station just as the second sun dipped below the jagged horizon. Inside, the emptiness was immense. Kalen dropped to his knees before the sub-control panel. Dust and dead spiders coated the manual overrides. He stripped the bypass wires with his teeth, the copper tasting like blood, and slammed the switch. Power surged. The ancient booster array groaned to life above them. "Slot it," he told her. Alara jammed the cipher into the terminal. The screen flared green, a wide-burst data upload, firing straight into the upper orbital lanes. The cover-up was out. And that's when the heavy blast doors of the station shrieked in protest. Thermal charges, sweepers. The heavy blast doors of the station buckled inward with a deafening metallic screech. Kalen grabbed Alara's shoulder, shoving her hard toward the maintenance grating at the back of the control room. They scrambled into the cramped, freezing titanium belly of the station just as thermal charges blew the main entryway to slag. Shouts echoed through the ventilation shaft beneath them. Corporate sweepers didn't just clear rooms, they sterilized them. Kalen dragged himself forward on his elbows, the serrated edges of the duct tearing at his vac suit. Every breath felt like inhaling razor blades. He could hear Alara right behind him, her movements frantic but entirely silent. The survival instinct of a ghost. They kicked out the exterior exhaust grate and tumbled blindly into the howling white of the exit ridge. They hit the snowbank hard, lungs burning, vision blurring from the sheer velocity of the wind. Silas Thorne was already waiting for them. The lead corporate sweeper stood like a monolith against the glare of the dual suns, his heavy impact armor humming with thermal energy. The arc whip snapped searing ozone into Kalen's ribs. And just as the violet line coiled tight, Alara struck. Her scavenged vibro blade found the sweeper's throat before he could retract the lash. Kalen didn't hesitate. He launched his entire weight forward, planting his boots into the frozen crust. He tackled Thorne directly at the knees, driving the massive enforcer deep into the powder. Thorne roared, dropping the whip and reaching for the mag pistol holstered at his hip. Kalen scrambled for purchase, his frozen fingers slipping uselessly off the polished obsidian armor, taking a brutal backhand to the jaw that tasted of copper. Alara snatched Kalen's fallen ion blaster from the ice. She didn't aim for center mass. She stepped inside Thorne's guard, pressed the hot muzzle directly against the joint of his shoulder armor, and fired. The blast fused the plating to his flesh, pinning him to the permafrost with a localized electromagnetic charge. Thorne gasped, his eyes wide with sudden, agonizing realization as the servos in his suit locked down. Alara stood over him, her breath pluming heavily in the freezing air. She leaned in close, whispering that the orbital network was already singing with his secrets, his career, his life, his pristine erasure record. It was all gone. She left him bleeding in the snow, entirely alive to face the very ruin he had built for others. The wide burst signal had worked. Within an hour, a rogue civilian hauler, drawn by the raw data bounty broadcasting on open channels, punched through the atmosphere and dragged them off the dying rock. Krios 9 faded into a pale marble in the viewport, swallowed completely by the void. 3 days later, the air smelled entirely different. Pine needles, warm soil, synthetic ozone. Avalon Core was a sanctuary of green light and filtered warmth, a massive arboreal habitat suspended comfortably in the mid-rim. They cleared the automated medical scans as nameless refugees, slipping quietly into the crowded, sunlit lower tiers to claim a temporary flat. Kalen dropped his scorched survival gear by the door. The heavy silence of the room settled over them. It was no longer a threat, but a shield. He watched Alara shed the heavy thermal plating, the bruising along her ribs slowly fading into dull yellow. When she looked at him, the hardened, desperate edge of the ice world was gone. It was replaced by something entirely uncharted, a vulnerability that required far more bravery than surviving the cold, an invitation.